Across the rolling plain country of eastern Pennsylvania and the lower Susquehanna watershed, there has always existed a quiet documentary record of small heritage apiaries that the commercial honey industry of the 20th century chose not to study and did not understand. And the chronicler who walks the gravel lanes east of Bird in Hand will find these apiaries tucked behind board and batten honey houses, and beneath rows of heirloom apple trees that were planted in the closing decades of the 19th century by patriarchs whose great-grandsons still tend the same chestnut hive stands and the same rye straw skep benches that their fathers and grandfathers tended before them. And within these orchards, the lineage of the Italian honeybee and the German dark honeybee has been preserved continuously through the centrifugal extraction revolution that swept commercial American apiculture between the calendar years 1947 and 1969, and through the bulk wholesale rendering contracts of the post-war Lancaster County honey cooperatives, and through the federal grading reforms of 1968 that pressed the small farmstead honey producer to abandon the cedar pressing trough and the unbleached cheesecloth rack and adopt the stainless steel centrifugal extractor and the heated clarifying tank. And yet, in the four plain districts that border Bird in Hand and Intercourse and Gordonville and Ronks, the crush and strain method survived without interruption from the autumn of 1898 onward into the calendar year of this present account. And the women who managed these apiaries through widowhood and through drought years and through the foul brood scares of 1932 and 1958 kept their honey house ledgers in plain hand and their mason jar sale records in the back pages of the same ledgers and their swarm capture entries in the front pages. And the skep hive and the Langstroth box stood in the same plain orchards as silent chronicles of women's work that the commercial trade journals of the period did not record, and the Pennsylvania State University Department of Apiculture Extension bulletins did not enumerate, and the introduction of the Italian honeybee subspecies Apis mellifera ligustica into eastern Pennsylvania commercial apiaries dates to the calendar year 1859, when the Reverend Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth of Philadelphia imported the first documented Italian queens from the Ligurian Alps of northern Italy through the port of Baltimore and distributed founder colonies across the mid-Atlantic plain communities. And the German dark honeybee subspecies Apis mellifera had preceded the Italian by nearly a century, arriving in the Lehigh Valley with the Palatinate Mennonite migrations of the 1740s, and persisting in the Berks and Northampton and Lehigh County plain apiaries through 1898, when a Lehigh County beekeeper named Solomon Hertzler distributed German dark foundation stock westward to Cherry Hill Lane in Lancaster County, and to Cumberland County, and to several Berks County farms. And the centrifugal extraction revolution that began in the post-war years pressured every commercial honey producer in eastern Pennsylvania toward the Maxent and the Kelly stainless steel extractors and the heated clarifying tanks that strip the pollen and the propolis and the trace beeswax fragments from the finished honey and yield a clear filtered amber product suitable for grocery shelf shelving. And against this commercial transformation, the plain apiaries of Cherry Hill Lane and the surrounding District 6 lanes preserved the older method intact, and this is one such chronicle. The commercial honey industry of Lancaster County between the calendar years 1928 and 1967 was dominated by a single producer cooperative known as the Lancaster County Honey Producers Cooperative, headquartered at 218 East Main Street in the borough of Lititz, Pennsylvania. Founded in the autumn of 1928 by a federation of 14 commercial apiaries, situated across the northern half of Lancaster County and the southern edges of Lebanon and Berks counties, and by the calendar year 1967, the Lititz Cooperative controlled approximately 84% of the commercial extracted honey output of Lancaster County by pound-weight measurement, and operated a 28,400 square foot bottling and warehousing facility on East Main Street with rail siding access to the Reading Railroad and contracted distribution agreements with the regional grocery chains Acme Markets, A&P, and Weiss Markets, and the cooperative's centrifugal extraction line, installed between 1947 and 1952, consisted of 4 Kelly stainless steel radial extractors of 60 frame capacity each, 2 heated clarifying tanks of 1,200-gallon capacity each, and a 4-station rotary bottling line capable of filling approximately 3,216-ounce glass jars per operating shift, and the cooperative's contracted suppliers were required by the bylaws ratified in 1953 to deliver bulk extracted honey in food-grade 55-gallon drums to the East Main Street facility for centrifugal re-extraction, heated clarification, and uniform bottling under the cooperative's house brand label, and the bulk wholesale rate paid to contracted suppliers tracked the Chicago Commodity Exchange spot price for Grade A, extracted Clover honey, and averaged 34 cents per pound across the calendar years 1968 through 1972, and the United States Department of Agriculture issued in February of 1968 a revised set of bulk honey grading standards under the title USDA Honey Standards for Grades of Extracted Honey, 4th Revision, which classified honey by color, water white through dark amber, by moisture content, below 18.6% for Grade A, by filtration clarity, Fund scale optical readings, and by foreign particle content, pollen grains, propolis fragments, beeswax fragments, and the 1968 USDA standards penalized the crush and strain hand-pressing methods of the older plain apiaries because such methods retained pollen and propolis and trace beeswax fragments by deliberate intention, and the bulk grading penalties pressed nearly every small commercial honey producer in eastern Pennsylvania between 1968 and 1973 to abandon the crush and strain method and adopt the centrifugal extractor and the clarifying tank, and the District 6 Ordnung that governed the plain apiaries east of Bird in Hand had codified in its biennial revision of October 1949 a preservation of the hand-pressing crush and strain method as the only Ordnung-compliant honey extraction practice within the district, and the Deacon Christian Byler, who served District 6 from 1948 through 1971, entered into the district ledger on October 14, 1949, the formal notation that centrifugal extraction was a worldly mechanism not suited to plain apiculture, and through this Ordnung restriction, the District 6 apiaries preserved without interruption the older hand-pressing method, while the Lititz Cooperative's commercial monoculture consolidated across the remainder of Lancaster County and across the surrounding 7 counties of eastern Pennsylvania between 1947 and 1973. In April of 1967, On an 80-acre rolling hillside 3 miles east of Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, a 32-year-old Amish thresher named Daniel Stoltzfus and his wife Rebecca Stoltzfus paid $96 in cash for 12 hand-built Langstroth honeybee hives with established Italian honeybee colonies and 3 additional German dark honeybee colonies from an elderly Cumberland County plain beekeeper named Mahlon Born-Traeger. The transaction transpiring on the morning of April 14, 1967, at the Born-Traeger homestead 2 miles west of the borough of Newville in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, an 84-mile drive from Cherry Hill Lane that Daniel and Rebecca made in the back of a hired plane driver's 1962 Chevrolet pickup truck, departing Cherry Hill at 4:15 in the morning and returning shortly after 7 in the evening of the same day with the 12 white-painted Langstroth boxes and the 3 rye straw skeps secured under canvas tarpaulins and the established colonies clustered within and the field bees temporarily confined by screened entrance closures. And the seller, Mahlon Born-Traeger, was at the time of the transaction 78 years of age, a third-generation Cumberland County plain beekeeper whose father, Christian Born-Traeger Sr., had received Foundation German dark honeybee stock in the autumn of 1898 from a Lehigh County beekeeper named Solomon Hertzler, the same Solomon Hertzler whose Lehigh Foundation stock had earlier in the same season of 1898 been delivered to Cherry Hill Lane in Lancaster County to a Stoltzfus farmer named Christian Stoltzfus, who set the first dozen rye straw skep hives onto a low chestnut bench at the south end of the Cherry Hill orchard beneath the row of newly planted yellow Newtown pippin apple trees that the patriarch Jonas Stoltzfus had set into the orchard ground that same spring, and the 12 Italian-stocked Langstroth hives that Mahlon Born-Traeger sold to Daniel and Rebecca on April 14, 1967, had been added to the Born-Traeger apiary in the spring of 1934 from a United States Department of Agriculture distribution program operating out of the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center in Beltsville, Maryland, and the 3 German dark skep colonies were direct descendants by unbroken queen lineage of the 1898 Solomon Hertzler Lehigh stock. And Mahlon Born-Traeger, at 78 years of age in the spring of 1967, had developed a tremor of the right hand that prevented him from continuing the daily hive inspections and the smoker management and the comb cutting that the apiary required, and his 3 sons had taken modern English trades in Carlisle and Mechanicsburg, and did not wish to continue the apiary, and Mahlon Born-Traeger had advertised the dispersal of his foundation stock through the District 12 Cumberland County Plain Notice Board in the late winter of 1967, and Daniel Stoltzfus had read the notice posted at the Bird in Hand harness shop on March 19, 1967, and the transaction was arranged by letter through the intervening 4 weeks, and on the morning of April 14, 1967, Rebecca Stoltzfus, at 28 years of age, rode in the cab of the hired pickup truck with the plain driver, Henry Mast, while Daniel rode in the truck bed beside the canvas-covered hive boxes and watched the road behind them for any dislodged frame or fallen skep across the 84-mile homeward drive. In the 8 weeks immediately following the Cumberland County purchase, Daniel Stoltzfus constructed at the east edge of the Cherry Hill orchard a plain pine, board and batten honey house outbuilding, measuring 8 feet by 10 feet on a hand-cut chestnut sill foundation set 22 feet east of the southernmost row of yellow Newtown pippin apple trees. The framing accomplished between April 20th and May 6th of 1967 from green pine sawn at the Byler Sawmill 3/4 of a mile northwest of Cherry Hill at a sawing cost of $11.40, entered into the farmstead ledger on April 22nd. The board and batten siding, installed between May 9th and May 18th of 1967 from plain pine boards left unpainted in the District 6 fashion and battened with 1x3 vertical strips at 16-inch on-center spacing, the standing seam tin roof installed on May 22nd of 1967 at a tin supply cost of $14.80, entered into the ledger on May 23rd, and the interior of the honey house finished between May 24th and June 3rd of 1967, with a hand-built cedar pressing trough measuring 36 inches in length by 18 inches in width by 11 inches in depth. The trough, constructed of quarter-sawn Pennsylvania red cedar lumber, selected for its resistance to honey acid staining and its natural antifungal properties, the corners dovetailed and the seams sealed with hand-rendered beeswax, and beside the trough, Daniel installed a 3-tier cheesecloth rack of hand-cut white oak with shelves spaced 14 inches apart vertically and fitted with 3-foot square wooden frames, over which the unbleached cotton cheesecloth was stretched in 3 layers and pinned with hand-forged copper tacks for the slow gravity straining of the crushed comb. And along the south wall of the honey house, Daniel built 6 pine shelves of 3-foot length and 12-inch depth to accommodate the storage of empty and filled mason jars in pint and quart sizes, and beneath the north window, Daniel set a hand-built beeswax rendering double boiler of riveted copper sheet, the outer vessel of 2-gallon capacity for the water bath, and the inner vessel of 1-gallon capacity for the wax. The double boiler, fitted with a hand-built oak handle and a riveted copper spout for pouring the molten beeswax into the cooling molds. And on the morning of June 8, 1967, Rebecca Stoltzfus inspected each of the 15 hive boxes she and Daniel had transported from Newville and recorded in a hand-bound apiary ledger of pressed marbled paper covers the queen status, brood pattern, comb development, and forager activity of each colony, and the first hand-pressed honey extraction of the Cherry Hill apiary was conducted by Rebecca Stoltzfus on the morning of September 14, 1967. 4 honey supers cut from 3 of the Italian Langstroth colonies and crushed in the cedar trough using a hand-built oak crushing paddle. The crushed comb left to gravity strain through the 3 layers of cheesecloth across 36 hours from the afternoon of September 14th through the evening of September 16th, and 38 pounds and 4 ounces of finished crush and strain honey decanted into 22-pint mason jars and 9-quart mason jars on the morning of September 17, 1967, and labeled in Rebecca's plain hand with the date September 1967 and the hive source identification numbers H1 through H3, the first entry of the Cherry Hill Honey House ledger. By the spring of 1969, the Cherry Hill apiary had completed its second full extraction cycle, and Rebecca Stoltzfus had begun transporting hand-pressed mason jars of the September 1968 honey to the Lancaster Farmers Market at 23 North Market Street in the borough of Lancaster, 15 miles southwest of Cherry Hill Lane, where she rented a half stall on alternating Saturdays in cooperation with the Glick family vegetable stand operated by Naomi Glick of Intercourse, and the mason jars were priced at 38 cents per pint and 68 cents per quart, equivalent to approximately $1.14 per pound of finished honey, against the prevailing Lancaster County grocery shelf retail price of approximately 18 cents per ounce or $1.44 per pound for centrifugally extracted Sioux Bee Clover honey, distributed nationally by the Sioux Honey Association Cooperative of Sioux City, Iowa, and on the morning of Saturday, September 13th, 1969, a 53-year-old English confectioner named Harold Stickle of the Lititz Confectioners Retail Shop at 419 South Broad Street in Lititz arrived at the Lancaster Farmers Market between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in the morning on a regional survey of competitive sweetener pricing in advance of his autumn confectionery production cycle. And Harold Stickle stopped at the Glick half stall, where Rebecca Stoltzfus had set out 38-pint mason jars and 14-quart mason jars of the September 1968 hand-pressed clover honey, and Harold Stickle examined a pint mason jar against the morning light, observing the cloudiness imparted by the retained pollen and the trace beeswax fragments, and Harold Stickle set the jar back on the table and remarked in a voice loud enough to be overheard by the adjoining vendors that no Lancaster customer of reasonable judgment would pay 38 cents for a mason jar of dark unfiltered plain honey, when Sioux Bee clarified Clover honey could be purchased for 18 cents per ounce at every grocery in the county, and the remark was witnessed by Naomi Glick and by the adjoining cheese vendor Mervyn Esch, and by 2 plain customers from District 4, and Naomi Glick repeated the remark verbatim that same afternoon to her husband Reuben Glick at the Intercourse Harness Shop, and from the Intercourse Harness Shop the account traveled by ordinary plain conversation across the 4 eastern Lancaster County districts within 2 weeks, and by the second week of October 1969, the report of the Stickle dismissal had reached by indirect channels the Lititz facility of the Lancaster County Honey Producers Cooperative, and the cooperative's purchasing manager, Curtis Lehman, entered a brief notation on October 17, 1969, in the Southern Lancaster County Contact Log, under the line item Bird in Hand Area, Hand Press Honey, Cherry Hill Lane, Stoltzfus Widow, Declined Wholesale Offer, Non-Modern Plain Beekeeper, the same notational language Galen Cedar had entered on June 11th of the same year following his earlier visit to the Cherry Hill Gate. The general manager of the Lancaster County Honey Producers Cooperative through the calendar years 1967 through 1976 was a 58-year-old third-generation cooperative officer named Galen Cider, whose grandfather, Aaron Cider, had been one of the 14 founding directors of the cooperative in the autumn of 1928, and whose father, Reuben Cider, had served as the second general manager from 1944 through 1962, and Galen Cider had taken the general manager position in March of 1962, following his father's retirement and his own 33-year apprenticeship through the bottling line, the purchasing department, and the assistant management ranks, and Galen Cider's residential address at the time of the events of this account was 412 East Main Street, Lititz, a 5-bedroom 1907 Queen Anne frame house, situated 4 blocks east of the cooperative's bottling facility, and Galen Sider's wife, Mildred Sider, managed the cooperative's office accounts on a part-time basis through the 1969 to 1974 period. And the bottling director of the cooperative through the same calendar years was a 52-year-old former United States Army Quartermaster Corps logistics officer named Theo Mellinger, who had taken the bottling director position in October of 1959 following 6 years of work at the Hershey Foods Bottling and Packaging Division in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And Theo Mellinger's primary responsibility was the operational management of the cooperative's 4-station rotary bottling line and the maintenance of the centrifugal extraction equipment, and the purchasing manager of the cooperative through the same calendar years was a 49-year-old former Penn State agricultural economics graduate named Curtis Lehman, who had taken the purchasing manager position in March of 1966, following 12 years as a regional sales representative for the Kelly Beekeeping Equipment Company of Clarkson, Kentucky. And Curtis Lehman's primary responsibility was the negotiation of bulk honey procurement contracts with the cooperative's 78 contracted regional suppliers. And the chief quality control chemist of the cooperative through the same calendar years was a 54-year-old Penn State apiculture graduate named Dr. Vernon Tice, who held a 1942 doctorate from the Pennsylvania State University Department of Apiculture and had taken the quality control chemist position in September of 1948, following 6 years of wartime laboratory work at the United States Department of Agriculture Beltsville facility. And Dr. Vernon Tice's primary responsibility was the operation of the cooperative's quality control laboratory and the certification of bottled lots to the 1968 USDA grading standards. And apart from the Lidditz Cooperative, the English confectioner Harold Stickle of Lidditz Confectioners at 419 South Broad Street, Lidditz operated a small retail confectionery and preserve shop that he had inherited from his father, Walter Stickle, in 1953, and that he had managed continuously through the calendar year of these events. And the Pennsylvania State University Department of Apiculture Extension Specialist, who would visit Cherry Hill Lane on August 4th, 1971, was a 51-year-old Cornell College of Agriculture graduate named Dr. Russell Burkholder, who had taken his Penn State Extension position in October of 1949, following his Cornell graduation in June of 1947, and a 2-year doctoral residency at the Cornell Apiculture Station at Ithaca, New York. And Dr. Russell Burkholder's primary responsibility through the Lancaster County region was the dissemination of the Penn State Cooperative Extension Service brochures on modern apiculture practice across the 72 contracted Lancaster County honey producers. On the morning of June 11, 1969, at 20 minutes past 9 o'clock, Galen Sider and Curtis Lehman departed the Lidditz Cooperative Facility at 218 East Main Street in Galen Sider's 1967 Chrysler Newport sedan and drove the 14 miles east-southeast to Cherry Hill Lane, arriving at the Stoltzfus Gate at 12 minutes past 10 o'clock. And Daniel Stoltzfus had been killed on February 21st of that same year, 1969, by a falling black walnut limb during the late winter clearing of the western pasture wood lot. And Rebecca Stoltzfus, at 30 years of age, had been operating the Cherry Hill Apiary as widow and sole proprietor through the 4 intervening months. and Rebecca Stoltzfus met Galen Sider and Curtis Lehman at the farmhouse kitchen door, wearing her plain black apron over her dark blue working dress and her white prayer covering, and Galen Sider presented a wholesale rendering contract on cooperative letterhead offering the prevailing 1969 bulk extracted honey wholesale rate of 34 cents per pound for the entirety of the Cherry Hill annual honey production, with delivery to be made in food-grade 55-gallon drums at the East Main Street facility for centrifugal re-extraction and heated clarification under the cooperative's house brand label, and Rebecca Stoltzfus examined the contract for approximately 4 minutes by Galen Sider's later recorded account and returned the contract to Galen Sider unsigned with the observation that the mason jar she sold at the Lancaster Farmers Market at 38 cents per pint and 68 cents per quart returned to her approximately $1.14 per pound, and that the cooperative's offer represented less than 30% of her existing income from the same pound weight of finished honey, and Galen Sider attempted to clarify that the cooperative's offer represented bulk delivery without the labor of jar filling and mason jar storage and weekend market attendance, and Rebecca Stoltzfus replied that the labor of jar filling and weekend market attendance was the work she preferred and that she had no inclination to enter a bulk delivery contract. And Galen Sider and Curtis Lehman departed the Cherry Hill gate at 11:15 and returned to the Littitz facility, and Galen Sider entered into the cooperative's Southern Lancaster County contact log. Later that afternoon, the notation Cherry Hill Lane, Stoltzfus widow, declined wholesale offer 34 cents per pound, non-modern plain beekeeper, and on the afternoon of August 4th, 1971, at 2:30, Dr. Russell Burkholder arrived at the Cherry Hill gate in a 1969 Plymouth Fury sedan, bearing Pennsylvania State University Cooperative Extension Service license plates, and carrying a folder of extension brochures titled Modern Centrifugal Honey Extraction and Sanitary Bottling, 2nd edition, June 1971. And Dr. Russell Burkholder presented to Rebecca Stoltzfus the brochure's recommendation that the Cherry Hill Apiary abandon the crush and strain pressing method and adopt a Maxent 1700P 12-frame stainless steel radial centrifugal extractor at a 1971 retail price of $1,184 and a Kelly 200-pound heated clarifying tank at a 1971 retail price of $284 for a combined modernization investment of approximately $1,468. And Rebecca Stoltzfus examined the brochure for approximately 3 minutes and returned it to Dr. Russell Burkholder, unread past the second page with the observation that the Ordnung of District 6 did not permit centrifugal extraction, and that the question of modernization was not one of price, but of practice. And Dr. Russell Burkholder returned to the State College Extension office that evening and entered the Visit into the Lancaster County Cooperative Extension Service annual report for fiscal year 1971 to 1972 under the line item Non-Compliant Farmstead, Cherry Hill Lane, Bird in Hand Area, Hand Press Honey Producer. The chronicler pauses here in the documentary record to note for the listener that the events recounted in this account are reconstructed from 3 principal surviving sources held in 3 separate archival locations. The first source being the Cherry Hill Honey House Ledger maintained by Rebecca Stoltzfus from the September 1967 first extraction through the September 1979 entries of her later years. The ledger of pressed marbled paper covers and 144 lined pages, preserved in the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society collection at 2215 Millstream Road in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, under accession number LMHS-1981-204. Donated to the Society by Rebecca Stoltzfus's eldest daughter, Hannah Stoltzfus Byler, in October of 1981, with a deed of gift restricting photographic reproduction of the interior pages, the second source being the National Apiary Cooperative Federation contract file preserved in the Federation's archive at 1614 University Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin, under file designation NACF-PA-LANC-1975-007 and containing the executed July 4, 1975 multi-year supply contract, together with the 7 preliminary negotiation letters and the annual production and payment statements from 1975 through 1982, and the third source being the Mother Earth News editorial archive maintained at the magazine's Hendersonville, North Carolina office, containing Audrey Whitcomb's September 1975 reporter's notebook entries, the photographic negatives of the apiary structures and the honey house equipment, and the editorial correspondence file pertaining to the November-December 1975 feature, and the chronicler returns now to the ledger entries of the years between 1967 and 1973. The Cherry Hill Honey House ledger, preserved at the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society, records the season-by-season production of the apiary across the 7 calendar years, from 1967 through 1973, with the meticulous accounting of a plain widow who kept a single account against which her household and her farmstead operated, and the September 1967 first extraction recorded 38 pounds and 4 ounces of finished crush and strain honey decanted into 22-pint mason jars and 9-quart mason jars from the 3 Italian Langstroth colonies that had been most established at the time of the April 14th transport, and the 1968 extraction recorded by Rebecca Stoltzfus and Daniel Stoltzfus jointly between September 8th and September 12th of 1968, yielded 142 pounds and 8 ounces of finished honey from 9 of the 12 Italian Langstroth colonies and 2 of the 3 German Darkskep colonies, decanted into 84-pint mason jars and 31-quart mason jars, and stored on the south wall shelving of the honey house. The 1968 beeswax rendering yielded 14 pounds and 6 ounces of clarified beeswax, cast into 22 4-ounce cake molds and 3 1-pound block molds. The swarm capture entries of the 1968 season recorded 4 primary swarms captured between May 14th and June 22nd of 1968 and rehived into hand-built Langstroth boxes that Daniel had constructed across the winter of 1967 to 1968, bringing the total hive count by autumn 1968 to 16 Langstroth boxes plus the 3 original skeps, and the February 21, 1969 entry in the ledger, written in Rebecca Stoltzfus's hand, records the death of Daniel Stoltzfus by falling black walnut limb in the western pasture woodlot at 27 minutes past 3 o'clock in the afternoon, witnessed by the District 6 Deacon Christian Byler and the neighbor Amos King, who had been assisting in the late winter woodlot clearing, and Daniel Stoltzfus was buried in the District 6 cemetery at the corner of Cherry Hill Lane and Old Philadelphia pike on February 24th, 1969, in a ceremony conducted by Christian Byler, and the 1969 extraction conducted by Rebecca Stoltzfus alone between September 11th and September 16th of 1969 yielded 168 pounds and 12 ounces of finished honey from 11 Italian Langstroth colonies and all 3 German dark skep colonies, decanted into 96-pint mason jars and 38-quart mason jars, and the 1970 extraction recorded by Rebecca Stoltzfus between September 7th and September 13th of 1970 yielded 218 pounds and 4 ounces of finished honey from 14 Italian Langstroth colonies and 4 German dark skep colonies, 1 new skep having been added in the spring of 1970 from a primary swarm captured on May 18th, decanted into 122-pint mason jars and 56-quart mason jars. The 1971 extraction conducted between September 6th and September 14th of 1971 yielded 318 pounds and 8 ounces of finished honey from 18 Italian Langstroth colonies and 5 German dark skep colonies, decanted into 168-pint mason jars and 84-quart mason jars. The 1972 extraction conducted between September 4th and September 14th of 1972 yielded 412 pounds and 12 ounces of finished honey from 21 Italian Langstroth colonies and 6 German dark skep colonies, decanted into 232-pint mason jars and 102-quart mason jars. And the 1973 extraction, conducted between September 3rd and September 16th of 1973, yielded 480 pounds and 6 ounces of finished honey from 22 Italian Langstroth colonies and 6 German dark skep colonies, decanted into 264-pint mason jars and 122-quart mason jars, the highest annual yield the Cherry Hill Apiary had recorded through that point. By the autumn of 1971, the Cherry Hill Apiary had grown from the original 12 Italian Langstroth boxes and 3 German dark skeps, purchased from Mahlon Bornträger in April of 1967, to a population of 18 Italian Langstroth boxes and 5 German dark skeps arranged across the south-facing orchard in 5 short rows beneath the row of yellow Newtown pippin apple trees that Jonas Stoltzfus had planted in the spring of 1898, and Rebecca Stoltzfus had constructed 6 additional Langstroth boxes through the winters of 1969 to 1970 and 1970 to 1971. Using the construction plans Daniel had drawn in pencil on brown butcher paper in the spring of 1967, and that Rebecca had preserved in the back of the Honey House ledger, and by the autumn of 1973, the apiary had grown to 22 Italian Langstroth boxes, plus 6 German dark skeps, with the Langstroth boxes arranged in 3 rows of 4 plus a 4th row of 5, plus a partial 5th row of 5, and the skeps set along the low chestnut bench at the south end of the orchard in their original 1967 arrangement, extended by 3 additional skeps Rebecca had constructed from rye straw and split chestnut hoops across the winter of 1971 to 1972, and the annual production of 480 pounds and 6 ounces in the autumn of 1973, represented a 12.5-fold increase over the 38 pounds and 4 ounces of the September 1967 first extraction, and the mason jar storage on the south wall shelving of the original 8 by 10-foot honey house had reached capacity by the summer of 1972, prompting Rebecca to construct in the months between June and August of 1972 a 16-foot addition to the east side of the Honey House in plain pine board and batten siding. Matching the original construction, the addition measuring 8 feet by 16 feet on a hand-cut chestnut sill foundation and providing space for a second cedar pressing trough of identical dimensions to the original. Constructed by the carpenter Levi Lapp at a labor and material cost of $34.20 entered into the ledger on July 14, 1972. A second three-tier cheesecloth rack of identical hand-cut white oak construction, and an expanded mason jar storage shelving system of 12 additional pine shelves, each 3 feet in length, and the second cedar pressing trough enabled Rebecca Stoltzfus to conduct 2 parallel crush and strain operations through the September extraction window of 1972 and 1973, and to complete the larger harvest of 1973 within the same 13-day window that had previously accommodated the smaller harvests of 1969 and 1970. And by the autumn of 1973, the Honey House contained 2 cedar pressing troughs, 2 3-tier cheesecloth racks, the original hand-built beeswax rendering double boiler, 18 pine storage shelves accommodating approximately 400 mason jars, and 3 hand-built oak crushing paddles of varying weight for the heavier and lighter comb sections of the established Langstroth colonies and the lighter comb of the German dark skeps. In the calendar year 1973, a confluence of disruptive factors descended upon the United States refined sugar supply that would transform the commercial domestic sweetener market across the following 24 months, and that would, by the spring of 1975, reach into the operations of the Lancaster County Honey Producers Cooperative at Lidditz, Pennsylvania, with consequences the cooperative's general manager, Galen Sider, had not anticipated. And the first of these disruptive factors was the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries oil embargo, declared on October 17, 1973, by the Arab member states of OPEC against the United States and the Netherlands and the Republic of South Africa in response to the United States resupply of the Israeli military during the Yom Kippur War of October of that year. The embargo raising the spot price of West Texas intermediate crude oil from $3.07 per barrel in early October 1973 to $12.18 per barrel by March of 1974, and sharply elevating the transportation costs for imported raw sugar from the Caribbean and South American producer nations and the Pacific cane regions. And the second of these disruptive factors was a sustained 2-year drought through the calendar years 1972 and 1973 across the principal Hawaiian and Louisiana cane sugar-growing regions, the drought reducing the domestic United States cane sugar harvest by an estimated 31% below the 1971 baseline production of approximately 6.4 million short tons of refined cane sugar, according to the United States Department of Agriculture Annual Sugar Report for fiscal year 1974, and the third of these disruptive factors was the December 31st, 1973, expiration of the United States Sugar Act of 1948, which had governed the import quota structure for Cuban and other Caribbean refined sugar since the early 1950s, and which had been allowed to expire without renewal by the United States Congress. The expiration removing the quota protections that had stabilized domestic refined sugar wholesale pricing across the preceding 2 decades. And the fourth of these disruptive factors was the cumulative impact across calendar year 1974 of the preceding three factors converging on the New York Commodity Exchange spot price for refined white sugar, which had stood at 12 cents per pound at the November 1972 baseline, and which rose progressively through the calendar year 1974 to peak at 65 cents per pound in the second week of November 1974, a 5.4-fold increase over the November 1972 baseline, and the highest refined sugar spot price recorded on the New York Commodity Exchange since the United States entry into the First World War in April of 1917. And by the spring of 1974, retail grocery stores across eastern Pennsylvania and across the Mid-Atlantic and across much of the United States outside the cane-producing southern states were reporting empty refined sugar shelves and rationing notices. And by the autumn of 1974, the United States Department of Agriculture had issued through its Cooperative Extension Service network a formal home economics advisory recommending consumers substitute alternative sweeteners, namely honey, maple syrup, sorghum molasses, and blackstrap molasses, for refined cane sugar in domestic kitchen use across the categories of baking, preserving, and beverage sweetening. And the wholesale honey spot price on the Chicago Commodity Exchange that had averaged 34 cents per pound through the calendar year 1972 rose progressively through the calendar year 1974 to reach $1.18 per pound by the second week of December 1974, a 3.5-fold increase over the 1972 average and the highest wholesale honey spot price recorded on the Chicago Exchange since the wartime sugar rationing of the years 1943 through 1945. The Lancaster County Honey Producers Cooperative at 218 East Main Street in Lidditz had operated through the calendar years 1968 through 1973 on a steady-state inventory model that prioritized centrifugal extraction volume and uniform clarified bottling, and the cooperative's purchasing manager, Curtis Lehman, had contracted bulk honey supply through the 78 regional contracted suppliers at the prevailing Chicago Commodity Exchange wholesale rate, averaging 34 cents per pound across the period, and had bottled approximately 880,000 16-ounce house brand jars per fiscal year for distribution through the Acme Markets, A&P, and Weiss Markets regional grocery accounts, and the cooperative's customary inventory cycle through the period 1968 to 1973 had averaged 90 calendar days, from the bottling line filling date through the regional grocery shelf clearance, and the cooperative's quality control chemist, Dr. Vernon Tice, had certified each bottled lot to the 1968 USDA grading standards across the period without exception. And the cooperative's general manager, Galen Sider, had reported to the cooperative's board of directors at the annual meeting of January 14, 1974, a fiscal year 1973 net surplus of $284,000 against gross revenues of $4.18 million. And the cooperative's operations entered the calendar year 1974 with no perceived need for strategic adjustment. But across the spring and summer and autumn of 1974, The convergent sugar substitution pressure on the United States domestic honey market reshaped the cooperative's commercial position with a speed the board of directors had not modeled. And in the second week of October 1974, the cooperative's bottling director, Theo Mellinger, reported to Galen Cider that the September 1974 bottling output had cleared the regional grocery shelves within 11 calendar days from the bottling line filling date against the customary 90-day inventory cycle, and that the cooperative's contracted 1975 bottling commitments to the Acme Markets, A&P, and Weiss Markets accounts exceeded the projected 1975 production capacity by approximately 47% at the prevailing 78 supplier procurement volume, and the cooperative's purchasing manager, Curtis Lehman, calculated through the third week of October 1974 that the cooperative would require approximately 1.18 million additional pounds of bulk honey procurement across the calendar year 1975 to meet the contracted 1975 bottling commitments at the prevailing centrifugal extraction volume model. And on November 4, 1974, the cooperative's board of directors authorized Galen Cider to initiate emergency procurement of bulk honey from any available regional source at the prevailing Chicago Commodity Exchange wholesale rate of approximately $1.10 per pound and at premium rates above the exchange spot where regional inventory could be secured, and across the second and third weeks of November 1974. Galen Cider directed Curtis Lehman to contact all 78 contracted regional suppliers with revised procurement offers, and to contact additionally a list of approximately 24 non-contracted regional honey producers known to operate small volume apiaries across Lancaster, Berks, Lebanon, Chester, and Cumberland counties. And among the list of non-contracted regional honey producers, Galen Cider added by his own hand, on the morning of November 14, 1974, the line entry, Cherry Hill Lane, Stoltzfus Widow, hand-press honey, approximately 480 pounds annual production. On the morning of November 18, 1974, at 9:15, Galen Cider departed the Lidditz Cooperative Facility at 218 East Main Street, alone in his 1972 Chrysler New Yorker sedan, and drove the 14 miles east-southeast to Cherry Hill Lane, arriving at the Stoltzfus Gate at 5 minutes past 10 o'clock, 5 years and 5 months after his previous June 11, 1969 visit with Curtis Lehman. And Rebecca Stoltzfus, at 35 years of age, met Galen Cider at the farmhouse kitchen door, wearing her plain black apron over her dark gray working dress and her white prayer covering, and Galen Cider presented a revised wholesale procurement contract on cooperative letterhead, offering a procurement rate of $1.14 per pound for the entirety of the Cherry Hill 1974 hand-pressed honey inventory, with delivery to be made in bulk to the East Main Street facility for rebottling under the cooperative's house brand label, and the offered rate of $1.14 per pound was the exact retail rate Rebecca Stoltzfus had been capturing through the Lancaster Farmers Market mason jar sales across the preceding 5 years, and Rebecca Stoltzfus examined the revised contract for approximately 3 minutes by Galen Cider's later recorded account and returned the contract to Galen Cider unsigned, with the observation that the cooperative's offered rate represented her existing retail capture and provided no premium for delivery to the Lidditz facility, and no premium for the surrender of her direct customer relationships at the Lancaster Farmers Market. And Rebecca Stoltzfus offered instead to sell Galen cider, a single one-time allotment of 80 pounds from the 1974 inventory, at $1.84 per pound, on the condition that the 80 pounds be bottled by the cooperative with the source identification Cherry Hill Lane, Lancaster County Crush and Strain Clover Honey, clearly printed on each retail label, and Galen Cider declined the labeling condition on the grounds that the cooperative's bottling line was committed to the Uniform House brand label and that no source-identified bottling could be accommodated within the existing operations. And Galen Cider departed the Cherry Hill Gate at 20 minutes past 11 and returned to the Lidditz facility, and Galen Cider entered into the cooperative's Southern Lancaster County contact log later that afternoon the notation Cherry Hill Lane, Stoltzfus widow, declined, revised wholesale offer, $1.14 per pound. Counter offer 80 pounds at $1.84 per pound with source labeling condition, declined, status non-contracted, and on the morning of June 22, 1975 at 20 minutes past 11 o'clock, a 1973 Buick Electra sedan bearing Wisconsin state license plates pulled into the gravel turnaround at the Cherry Hill Gate, carrying a 57-year-old executive director of the National Apiary Cooperative Federation named Theodore Auerbach, who had departed his Madison, Wisconsin office at 5:15 in the morning of June 20th of that same year, and had driven the 832 miles eastward across Wisconsin and Illinois and Indiana and Ohio and Pennsylvania, with 2 overnight stops at Toledo, Ohio and Bedford, Pennsylvania. And Theodore Auerbach presented to Rebecca Stoltzfus at the farmhouse kitchen door a multi-year national supply contract proposal on Federation letterhead, and the negotiations conducted across the 2 weeks following June 22, 1975, culminated on the morning of July 4, 1975, with the formal contract signing in the presence of the District 6 Deacon Christian Baylor at the Cherry Hill Farmhouse kitchen table. The National Apiary Cooperative Federation supply contract, executed on July 4, 1975, at the Cherry Hill Farmhouse kitchen table, established a multi-year national distribution arrangement under 3 conditions Rebecca Stoltzfus presented in writing to Theodore Auerbach on the afternoon of June 22, 1975, and that Theodore Auerbach accepted on behalf of the Federation by countersignature on the same date. And the first condition required that the Cherry Hill honey be distributed under the source label Cherry Hill Lane, Lancaster County Crush and Strain Clover Honey, with the source identification printed clearly on each retail label and with no Federation House brand label substitution. And the second condition required that no synthetic glucose syrup or high fructose corn syrup or any other manufactured sweetener be blended with the Cherry Hill honey in distribution, and that the Cherry Hill honey be sold to the Federation's distribution accounts as pure, unblended, hand-pressed clover honey. And the third condition required that the Federation's quality control inspections of the Cherry Hill Apiary be conducted in compliance with the District 6 ordning restrictions on photographic documentation of plain operations, namely that no photographic record be made of Rebecca Stoltzfus herself, that no photographic record be made of the farmhouse interior, and that any photographic record made of the apiary structures or the honey house equipment be made only by prior written consent of the District 6 Deacon Christian Byler, and the first-year contract value executed on July 4, 1975, stipulated a procurement of 480 pounds of the 1975 Cherry Hill production at a procurement rate of $2.40 per pound for a first-year contract value of $1,152 against Rebecca Stoltzfus's 1974 farmstead operating income of $7,840, as recorded in the Cherry Hill Household Ledger, and on the morning of July 28, 1975, at 25 minutes past 10 o'clock, a 1974 Volvo 144 sedan, bearing Massachusetts state license plates, pulled into the gravel turnaround at the Cherry Hill Gate, carrying a 41-year-old purchasing director of the Erewhon Foods natural food specialty retailer of Boston, Massachusetts, named Maeve Tully, who had departed her Boston office on the morning of July 27, 1975, and had driven the 432 miles southwestward across Massachusetts and Connecticut and New York and Pennsylvania, with one overnight stop at Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. And Maeve Tully presented to Rebecca Stoltzfus a supplemental retail-only Boston area supply contract on Erewhon Foods letterhead, offering procurement of 240 pounds annually at a procurement rate of $2.80 per pound for exclusive retail distribution through the Erewhon Food storefront at 33 Farnsworth Street in Boston, Massachusetts, and Rebecca Stoltzfus accepted the supplemental contract on the same conditions of source-label distribution and pure unblended product and ordnance-compliant inspection. And on the afternoon of September 14, 1975, at 20 minutes past 2 o'clock, a 1971 Volkswagen Type II transporter van bearing North Carolina state license plates pulled into the gravel turnaround at the Cherry Hill Gate, carrying a 38-year-old contributing editor of Mother Earth News named Audrey Whitcomb, who had departed the Mother Earth News editorial office at 105 Stony Mountain Road in Hendersonville, North Carolina, at 6:15 in the morning of September 13, 1975, and had driven the 178 miles northward to the Cherry Hill Gate. And Audrey Whitcomb's resulting feature, titled The Last Crush and Strain Apiary in Lancaster County, appeared in the November-December 1975 issue of Mother Earth News at 4,800 published words. Between the second week of December 1974 and the second week of March 1976, each of the 4 executive officers of the Lancaster County Honey Producers Cooperative, and the English confectioner, Harold Stickle, and the Penn State Extension Specialist, Dr. Russell Burkholder, either visited the Cherry Hill Gate or wrote a letter to Rebecca Stoltzfus seeking a reconsideration of her commercial position. And the first such approach was Galen Cider's revised wholesale offer letter of January 18, 1975, mailed from the Lititz facility, offering procurement of the Cherry Hill 1975 production at a procurement rate of $2.84 per pound for bulk delivery to the East Main Street facility, for rebottling under the cooperative's house brand label, which Rebecca Stoltzfus declined by return letter dated January 22, 1975, on the grounds that the National Apiary Cooperative Federation contract negotiations were already in progress, and that the cooperative's continued insistence on house brand rebottling was not compatible with her preferred source labeled distribution, and on the morning of March 14, 1975, at 10:15, Theo Mellinger drove the 14 miles from the Lidditz facility to the Cherry Hill Gate in a 1973 Pontiac Catalina sedan and inquired of Rebecca Stoltzfus whether she would sell to the cooperative 3 of her hand-built Langstroth hive boxes for installation in the cooperative's proposed heritage apiculture exhibit at the East Main Street facility. And Rebecca Stoltzfus declined the sale of the 3 hand-built hive boxes, but offered to sell Theo Mellinger the original construction plans Daniel Stoltzfus had drawn in pencil on brown butcher paper in the spring of 1967 for $14 cash, which Theo Mellinger paid on the morning of March 14, 1975, and which Theo Mellinger transported back to the Lidditz facility for use in the cooperative's reconstructed heritage exhibit Langstroth display. And across the calendar, year 1975, the cooperative's bottling director, Theo Mellinger, and the cooperative's purchasing manager, Curtis Lehman, each made one further inquiry visit to Cherry Hill Lane on June 18, 1975 and August 22, 1975, respectively, and the cooperative's chief quality control chemist, Dr. Vernon Tice, wrote 2 letters dated July 12th and November 4th of 1975, inquiring about the apiary's pollen and propolis content for a proposed regional honey classification study, to which Rebecca Stoltzfus did not reply, and the English confectioner Harold Stickle of Lidditz Confectioners wrote 1 letter dated February 18, 1976, inquiring about the wholesale acquisition of 50 pounds of the Cherry Hill 1975 honey for autumn 1976 confectionery production, which Rebecca Stoltzfus declined by return letter dated February 24, 1976, and the Penn State Extension Specialist, Dr. Russell Burkholder, wrote 1 letter dated November 14, 1975, acknowledging the November-December 1975 Mother Earth News feature and inquiring whether the Cherry Hill Apiary would consent to inclusion in a proposed Penn State Heritage Apiculture Extension Bulletin, which Rebecca Stoltzfus declined by returned letter dated November 22, 1975. And the Lancaster County Honey Producers Cooperative entered partial receivership in the second week of October 1976, following the resolution of the sugar shortage and the return of refined cane sugar wholesale pricing to pre-embargo baseline ranges, and Galen Cider retired from the cooperative in February of 1977 at the age of 61, and Theo Mellinger took employment at a Berks County maple sugar operation outside Hamburg, Pennsylvania, in May of 1977. The principal national press coverage of the Cherry Hill Apiary across the calendar years 1975 and 1976 was Audrey Whitcomb's November-December 1975 Mother Earth News feature titled The Last Crush and Strain Apiary in Lancaster County, the 4,800-word article occupying pages 48 through 57 of the magazine's November-December 1975 issue, and accompanied by 12 black and white photographs of the apiary structures and the honey house equipment taken by Audrey Whitcomb on the afternoon of September 14th and the morning of September 15th, 1975. The photographs, limited at Rebecca Stoltzfus's request and at the Deacon Christian Byler's prior written consent to the apiary structures and the honey house equipment with no photographs of Rebecca Stoltzfus herself and no photographs of the farmhouse interior. And the Mother Earth News feature was reprinted in part across the calendar years 1976 and 1977 by several regional natural foods periodicals and was cited in the 1978 second edition of the Country Wisdom Bulletin titled Small Apiary Management for the Northeast, published by Story Communications of Pownell, Vermont. And the secondary regional press coverage included an August 14, 1975 feature in the Lancaster New Era newspaper titled Plain Beekeeper Signs National Honey Contract, written by the Lancaster New Era agricultural correspondent Stanley Hess at 1,440 published words, and accompanied by one photograph of the Cherry Hill Orchard Apiary, taken from a distance of approximately 300 feet, at Rebecca Stoltzfus's request to maintain her personal photographic anonymity. And the American Bee Journal published in its July 1975 issue Theodore Auerbach's National Apiary Cooperative Federation contract announcement at 320 published words under the title Pennsylvania Plain, Apiary Joins Federation Distribution at page 18 of the issue. And the Philadelphia Inquirer recurrent food writer Mariella Castellano published in her regional food column dated March 14, 1976, a 620-word entry titled A Lancaster County Honey Worth the Drive that recommended the Cherry Hill product to Philadelphia area readers, and that mentioned the Erewhon Foods Boston distribution arrangement as a regional comparison reference. And the District 6 deacon Christian Byler entered into the District 6 ministry ledger on July 7, 1975, the formal notation that the Cherry Hill Apiary Supply contract with the National Apiary Cooperative Federation had been reviewed and found to be in compliance with the Ordnung restrictions on photographic documentation and on the avoidance of synthetic blended sweeteners. And the District 6 ministry ledger entries across the calendar years 1976 through 1982 record the continued Federation contract renewals at progressively expanded annual procurement volumes. 480 pounds in 1975, 540 pounds in 1976, 580 pounds in 1977, 612 pounds in 1978, 624 pounds in 1979, 640 pounds in 1980, 656 pounds in 1981, and 660 pounds in 1982, at progressively adjusted procurement rates tracking the Federation's national wholesale benchmark. For source-identified heritage hand-pressed clover honey, and the Cherry Hill Apiary remained in continuous Federation contract through the final entry of Rebecca Stoltzfus's apiary ledger dated September 14, 1979, and through the subsequent management of the apiary by her eldest daughter, Hannah Stoltzfus Byler, from October of 1979 forward. In the autumn of 1898, on the same 80-acre rolling hillside 3 miles east of Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, where the events of this account would later transpire, a 42-year-old old order Amish farmer named Christian Stoltzfus, brother of the patriarch Jonas Stoltzfus, who had that same spring set into the south-facing orchard ground a row of yellow Newtown pippin apple trees, and who had across the preceding decade built the fieldstone spring house, the smoke house, and the soap house of the Cherry Hill farmstead, stood at the south end of the orchard in the late afternoon light of October 18th 1898, setting the first 12 hand-built rye-straw skep hives onto a low chestnut bench. The skeps, woven by Christian Stoltzfus across the preceding August and September of 1898, from rye straw harvested from the western pasture and split chestnut hoops cut from the Cherry Hill woodlot. Christian Stoltzfus's full, untrimmed, dark chestnut chest-length beard, streaked with gray, worn without a mustache in the old-order fashion, his weather-worn, ruddy skin, and his deep-set, dark blue eyes, and his broad-shouldered, sturdy build set against a plain, white, long-sleeved cotton shirt and broad-fall black trousers held by black canvas suspenders and plain black leather work boots. And beside him stood his wife, Esther Stoltzfus, at 39 years of age, holding a hand-built smoker pot of damp pine shavings, into which Christian periodically added small handfuls of dry meadow grass to maintain the cool gray smoke that calmed the German dark honeybee colonies. The Lehigh County beekeeper Solomon Hertzler had delivered to the Cherry Hill gate 2 weeks earlier, on the morning of October 4th, 1898, in the back of Solomon Hertzler's 1894 spring wagon, drawn by a black Percheron gelding named Job. The foundation colonies carried on damp wool cloths in 12 transport baskets and transferred at the south end of the orchard into the 12 newly woven skeps under the same low evening light, and Christian Stoltzfus had been taught beekeeping by his own father, Jakob Stoltzfus, in the spring of 1864 at the age of 8, on a Berks County farmstead near the village of Bowmansville. Jakob Stoltzfus, having kept German dark honeybees on the Bowmansville farmstead continuously from the spring of 1840 forward, from foundation stock Jacob had received in the spring of 1840 from a Northampton County beekeeper near Bath, Pennsylvania, whose name is recorded in the Stoltzfus family Bible as Benedict Kratz, and the German dark lineage Solomon Hertzler delivered to Cherry Hill Lane on October 4th, 1898, thus traced unbroken backward through the Lehigh County apiary and through the Berks County apiary of Jakob Stoltzfus and through the Northampton County apiary of Benedict Kratz, to a Palatinate Mennonite migration of approximately 1740, and the 12 rye-straw skeps Christian Stoltzfus set onto the low chestnut bench on the afternoon of October 18th, 1898, stood at the south end of the same Cherry Hill orchard where 69 years later, in the spring of 1967, Daniel and Rebecca Stoltzfus would set the 12 hand-built Langstroth hives and the 3 German dark skeps purchased from the Cumberland County beekeeper Malin Borntrigger. The same German dark lineage returned to Cherry Hill Lane through Malin Borntrigger's father, Christian Borntrigger Sr., who had received his own foundation German dark stock from the same Solomon Hertzler in the same autumn of 1898. If you have ever raised an animal everybody told you was the wrong one for your county, leave a comment below telling us what it was. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe and ring the bell. There is one of these stories in every county in America. We are working through them one harvest at a time.